Good day and welcome. And I'm really pleased today to have a dialogue with Professor Akin Fadahunsi. We actually worked together 25 years ago initially. Professor, how are you?
I am very well ready. It's great to see you again. You haven't
Great.
changed a bit.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I owe a lot of my development, professional development, to your guidance in those early days. And I don't know if you remember when you said to me, Rudy, you need to make a case study from your synergy model. Otherwise, you'll never be credited for the work that you've done.
Yeah, who knew? Who knew? I mean, it seemed like the sort of nice thing to say to a fellow warrior at the time, but who knew it would still be here all these years later.
Yes. And again, without that project, and I must say, it's, the work at the Royal College of Nursing, Imperial College London, working for the NHS Appointments Commission and other such bodies, and just having that systemic approach, in terms of being able to translate research-based reports and recommendations into implementations, not just within the systems, but in the neighborhoods, and still be able to work with communities, regardless of their backgrounds, cultures. I mean, it was significant. And then, of course, working with yourself, and then later on with Professor Smallbone, being able to understand the clarity and definition that you need from academics. And of course, with Professor Smallbone, we did joint presentations, government offices, Government Office of London in particular, and other sort of higher learning bodies, which historically wouldn't have looked at this approach that was focused on neighborhoods and communities.
That's true, and it's kind of poignant that we're actually having this conversation today. It's almost 4 years to the day, actually, since David Smallbone passed. Huge influence of me and on so many others, but I was quite fortunate to pass through his tutelage at the time. And this approach that you just referred to, it was second nature to him, He really believed this was the way to do it. And, we also picked up it at the time.
Yes, and in fact, we had an interesting dialogue, myself and him, when we first met, because he had that academic certainty, which was wrong as far as I was concerned. And he humbly did accept that and said, well, yes,
but
there
that
is
was
another
it.
way.
I think over those couple of years, we really all got to learn, and that's why we're talking still about it this time. I think if everybody had stayed in his own lane, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be talking about that approach, because it did actually change things for us as well in Middlesex at the time in terms of the way of doing things. There was a modification, and it was directly because of the work on this project.
Yeah, and interestingly enough as well, that I think the stimulus for it, because this obviously was a business link and a training and enterprise initiative. The North London Training and Enterprise Council, Business Link London North, and the North London Cultural Diversity Forum that was chaired by Dr. Edgar Neufeld. So he was also, if you remember, in Middlesex University.
True.
And I think what really ensure that there was going to be some change in attitude, academic attitude to this work, was one of the round tables that we had. It was based on a Bank of England report.
Yeah.
Where the gentleman, and I won't mention his name, I still remember his name, presented the report, and it was blue, a blue looking, you know, all regal, that said that when it came to financing, there was only a perception of inequalities when it came to African and Caribbean businesses. And at the time, I challenged him, because coming from the private sector originally, I challenged him at the meeting, and I said, I worked for a company called Dyke and Dryden, and at the time they were the largest hair products company doing beauty supplies in the Afro hair and beauty industry. And when they reached £1 million turnover, they could not get a bank overdraft for £5,000. And then he backed down and said, well, we just put this report together. And then the representative from the British Bankers Association then said, we need to do some research on that.
I would say in the probably early to mid 1990s, of course, a lot of work had been going on in the small business area. A lot of it just following I think it's the Brixton riots in the 1980s. So by the early to mid 1990s, there was a lot of certainty in what people felt they knew. So the picture was really that, okay, there's a small business issue, which is sort of distinct from a medium to large business issue. But then the distinctions amongst, the small businesses, where many of the, minority-owned businesses were, there wasn't a lot of attention paid to that. So the language, this word perception had sort of evolved over time, and by this period that you're speaking about had become some kind of an academic certainty. It was a perception of this and the perception of that, but really they said, well, these are small business issues, was the general conclusion leading up to that time.
Absolutely. And again, at least there was a systemic response from Business Link. So we had the enterprise agencies, so those people who really, needed that initial support, get their ideas, translated into some kind of plans. But then you had the business advisors, and the support for the access to finance team. And that made a big difference in terms of the development of some of those businesses, especially those that were kind of neighborhood based. And of course, linked to that, UK trade and investment now. There was a closer link in the pathway from, and the term that we used at the time was, it was about international trade as a tool for local economic development.
But you got it in a way that I think some of the rest of us had to sort of catch up to that thinking, because when you look at the different players, I was just speaking about the academic certainties. There was the policy plan uncertainties as well, because if you said, well, they would say there's a perception of problems, because they would always argue on the policy side that there's this initiative, there's that initiative, there's this other initiative, but then the business owners themselves knew, well, I am not getting this, I'm not getting that, so everybody in their own world, was certain of the issues, but everybody could not be right. I think what synergy brought into it, if we could distill it down to one word, it would be communication, you know. It was because, yes, it's true, there were several initiatives, and then, yes, it's true that, you know, because we academically could demonstrate that there were some awareness issues, like lack of awareness of some of the things that were there. So that was there. The academics were pointing out that the business owners were saying, well, we're not getting it. I'm not getting the support that I need to start, to stay alive. And the policy will say, well, we have this at the local level, we have this at the national level, but synergy demonstrated if you communicated the right way, you actually increase the overall efficiency.
You're so right. And where I got that from, because I started in regeneration in Harlesden in Brent. And that was in the days of City Challenge. And if you think of that policy intervention with City Challenge, and my role was the marketing of Harlesden Town Centre. So I could see, in terms of the retail businesses and the town centre and the 3-mile radius of in terms of housing, and I think that at the time there was like 26,000 houses within the 3-mile radius. That how do you make the town centre a place that the community will go to? And at the time, I recommended that we did events and activities, cultural activities, that the town centre becomes a place where the community enjoys itself, builds relationships, and all the different communities that make up, you know, your neighbourhood. That would be of benefit to the town centre as a whole. So increase the footfall, in other words. So at the time, the term I used, which I took from social marketing, was the means of communication may be different, but the needs are the same. And that's what I was pressing our colleagues, you know, in the synergy world. That was
when you brought that to the table, and I think that was why, you know, some of us felt that this thing needed to be documented, because once you explained it, it was like, well, of course, this is how it should be, you know. But everybody, and academia can be a closed world, and everybody is very, you know, sort of concerned with the next publication and those kinds of things and incremental knowledge, and there just wasn't the awareness, and you brought that reality into it through that time, using things that were already there, by the way, you know. It wasn't really about creating new layers of anything. It was really about better use of what was already available in the communities in North London at the time.
And you're so right, because again, before I kind of go on to that, I must mention Bernie Grant's role with the Global Trade Centre, because again, he demonstrated that, and of course, he was able to cut through all of the skepticism, or sorry, perception that there was institutionally when it came to African and Caribbean communities being able to play a significant economic role as it related to trade. You know, so in the old days, we would talk about the diaspora. We don't talk about it so much anymore. That's a bit of a misnomer now. We talk about families, sustainable communities. But the Global Trade Centre, again, showed the significance, impact in North London of having such a institution like that. You know, connecting, again, we're back to the international trade as a tool for local economic development.
And how true this is, because I remember, I think it was through you as well that we started to go to some of those meetings of the Global Trade Center, attending meetings and having focus groups with them. And I remember we would go back to the university. It made you want to tear up a lot of things that you'd done prior, because hearing from the ground up, and it's, you know, so it wasn't even so much now that yeah, there's a small business dimension. Okay, there is an ethnic dimension, but then those who wanted to trade internationally, again, there were things you need to understand on that level. And to hear them phrase challenges and obstacles, they were saying things that as academics, most of us hadn't really heard up until then. So it really needed to rethink so many things.
Absolutely. And then we have that point where, and you'd mentioned earlier about making best use of existing resources and the structures and institutions and understanding where the decision making takes place. And of course, that's what synergy really was about, the 1 +
Absolutely.
1 = 3, not just word, but actually carrying it out. And of course, that did make a difference in terms of the attitudes that people display.
It's just going back to the subject of Professor Smallbone. I know that this work, and around that time, it was one of the main things, that there were others, but this was one of the main things that really lit a fire under him about doing work that impacted policy. And then he took that, to Eastern Europe, to South America. By the time,
Kingston University.
He'd taken that model everywhere, and it really lit the fire under him at the time, because prior to Synergy, he'd already been doing important small business work. He had started a longitudinal study years before, but this really challenged things, and when you start to see results, it focused a lot of what he did subsequently. He took that idea into different contexts and different places. So it didn't seem like it at the time, but something really good was happening with the Synergy project.
And if you remember, it didn't last long, but the Small Business Service, when that came into being, Professor Smallbone had, he was one of the key figures.
Yeah, he was starting maybe a year or two prior or something. It was very new. And those, so by this time, they needed him and I think Mondoran, who was
Mondoran, of course. But Mondoran had done some good work.
Leicester, I think, at the time.
Yes, I first came into contact with Mondoran working with Business Link, Northwest London. So in those days, there was a program called Changing Futures, led by Vijay Amin. We can't leave out Vijay. Again, it really helped in my thinking, because having moved from the regeneration side with the local authority at Harlesden City Centre, Town Centre, I then moved into Business Link London Northwest. And that program with Vijay Amin, there was a program because what they wanted to do was to increase the diversity as well of business link consultants and practitioners, because they were, let's just say, they needed to improve.
Yeah, look, I do remember we came to some pretty big conclusions that there were, and it was, some of them concerned this issue, the fact that if you didn't have adequate cultural understanding of those that you were trying to support, you were almost just a part of the problem, regardless of intentions. You needed that if you were going to effectively deliver support. So it wasn't just enough to have the initiative. You really, conceptually speaking, you needed to have that cultural understanding.
Exactly. And in Synergy, exactly. And in Synergy, the simple line was, technical expertise and cultural understanding.
Yeah, yeah, it was very important. It could be, and I think prior to that, politically, it was not maybe very easy to advance the argument, but when it was seen to operate, that you could demonstrate, the fact that it did in fact work, then it helped to make that point constructive. You could make the point without actually looking like you were saying something else,
Yeah, and it's interesting because if you think of our systems today, there is the balance now between technical expertise, cultural understanding. However, what is missing is the implementation support to the systems itself.
Yeah, and I remember that, support typically was conceived of as something the provider brought, and then the beneficiary took and sort of went off. But I do remember that Synergy talked a lot about capacity building on both sides. Really?
Oh, you remember that?
Providers, yeah.
You remember that? Yeah.
And what a difference that made. What a difference. And one of the, and I don't want to say that we were very wise in realizing that. I think we did that because it was what we did, like going to all of those forums, going to all of those meetings. It was just what we did. But then we saw it actually made a difference.
Yeah.
So whether we went to the Paradigm Trade Organization or went to the Borough of Enfield or wherever, everybody needed to be on the same page, and that communication was so important. But
no, you're so right. And it could also it kind of reminds me that we would always say that capacity building goes both ways, as you just indicated there. And it was difficult for people to comprehend that. So the environment was important, and the leadership. So environment being, Mike Nixon, chief executive, he used to host the meetings.
Yeah.
And I used to arrange the meetings in his office in order to help the staff to understand that capacity building goes both ways.
And I tell you, that started then, and it follows me to this day. Without that buy-in, at that level, and I think in the tech then, it was a regular agenda item,
That's right.
and in my career today, it's really at the top of the strategic agenda. So we do it, we monitor, but it came from that. That's how I say this thing follows us. And but without that, and lots of people were churning out lots of reports and things. I would have just been another thing, if it wasn't implemented that way.
and how we utilize it today, especially in NHS system, is what we say to senior people, the chief executives, the chair, or ask, not say, ask, how have you been assuring yourself? So you've got the reports, but when there's challenges, how have you been assuring yourself? You've been, these reports, but the reality is there's some challenges within the system.
Yeah.
And then the other point that you made about the capacity building. So increasingly, where we are today, very early stages, we hear about co-production, co-learning.
Yeah.
Again, still about cultural awareness. But if we take co-production and co-learning, that's still a big challenge for the system. So the system will churn out lots of reports in terms of co-production toolkits. But again, making a tool from a toolkit and then saying to communities that use this tool for community collaboration that will have a collective impact, and that is actually recognized within the system. So we've still got another few years to go on getting the learning outcomes, as we would say, and the practical implementation of that.
I would agree with that, and we're also, 25 years later, we're trying to get to grips with that as well. And I think you mentioned learning outcomes as opposed to just outcomes per se.
Exactly. And I have to admit, again, I learned that in Imperial College London, that focus on learning outcomes is really important.
Yeah, especially because in today's language,
Yes.
the emphasis is really on about demonstrating impact.
Yes.
The impact of the things that you do. And so, defining your learning outcomes and then assessing the extent to which you've met them is, because if you do, set out those outcomes ahead of time, you want them to make an impact. And I think even back in 1999, Synergy was doing that without necessarily saying this is what, we didn't know. When it's looking back that now that that's actually what it did. But it helps today that you actually, you define them, you assess them, and then it's, you don't have to make a huge one or whatever the level is, but set, within your context, and then aim to do it, and you can assess periodically whether or not you're actually doing it.
Yeah, and the good thing about it, particularly the UK, of course, it has the institutions that when you can cut through the attitudes, you can actually get the result you want. Because you're right, we in Imperial College, we were able to facilitate what was called knowledge sharing symposiums.
Okay.
Right. And of course that was part of the learning. So share the learning that had been gained. So from previous activities with other institutions. And now we talk about sharing the learning, but it actually comes from the work at Imperial and then from Imperial back to Synergy. All those round tables that we used to do.
Yeah.
In the tech.
No, it's so true, and I mean, it wasn't always comfortable doing those things, if you recall.
Yeah.
But if we didn't have them, I think it would have been an entirely different different project.
Yeah.
And I know that these days you've taken this into the international arena.
Yeah.
What is your experience like with it all these years later?
It's been very good because we've been able to work in South Africa with the model. So we did the original London Joburg initiative, and then in Jamaica, in Antigua, in Montserrat, so a number of countries, and then take that thinking into the international development world as well, with an agency called RAFA, International Development Agency, but still translate it back into the UK, focusing on communities and neighborhoods. So it's a system that keeps going around, almost in a kind of like a circle. a circle, but the neighborhoods and communities respecting people from all cultures, backgrounds, as being important, and thinking about their well-being at the center as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think part of the longevity of it is because the extra thing that Synergy brought to the table was, you could call it life skills for academia, being able to find a place for purely academic knowledge in the real world. It was skills based. I mean, I'm talking about the communication angle, and that's sort of why it's somehow timeless. Technical knowledge will have its time, and then maybe supplanted by something else. A life skill is a life skill, and I think that philosophy, is something. It's not something that's going to go away in a hurry, and I think that somehow partly explains the longevity of this model, and it's not going away anytime soon either.
You make such a great point of that, and that's why I like dealing with you. Again, the clarity and definition that you bring is because today, and how we work today with communities, wherever they are, whether in the system or out in the neighborhoods, we say collaboration, trust, and cooperation. So that hasn't changed, but harmony is the foundation of all institutions. It always was the case, and it always will be the case.
The emphasis on trust. And if we go back to the beginning of Synergy, the quest, I would say, to earn the trust of the respondents was a big part in letting them open up in a way that was substantial enough to challenge the sort of received knowledge at the time. And this again, yes, we thought about it, but also we were kind of fortunate because just prior to Synergy, I was new postdoc at Middlesex and sort of learning things under David Smallbone, and we'd done a project actually in Canning Town, and it was about, I think it was for London East Tech, if I remember correctly.
And
so they just wanted to have a good idea of the makeup, the distribution, the numbers of the smaller enterprises who weren't necessarily in the system back then. So there was a lot of canvas and a lot of door-to-door. We spent months on this. But the benefit for that was you had to, communicate, meet people, and not just send them a survey, email, or flyer, or whatever it was.
Relationships.
We came out of that project, applied a bit of it. I think it was another project for the British Printing Federation or something, and then Synergy came along. So we really invested time then in getting to know those people, the communities that we went to, and that was so valuable in a way that we didn't even sort of realize, and it was a different way for us to work than at Middlesex, So and then the earning the trust, seeing the benefit of it cascaded into other things that we did, as part of that project.
And Middlesex University played a significant role in the Synergy anyway. And of course, the other learning institutions, Cornell, College of North East London at the time, because they had we did the big construction part of Synergy, because a report had come out and it said about the underrepresentation as it related to ethnic young people in the construction industry and allied sectors. And so that was a significant, and then we had the learning and skills fair where all the colleges got together, again, supported by Middlesex University. So we made that link, local people, local jobs, local skills. And there was that connection between those, those areas.
Really, you mentioned these things, it's like you're opening up a vault of, I was like, oh man, that is so true.
Yeah, then I remember going to Italy. I remember going to Italy and presenting the Synergy project in Turin. There was a conference, and that was Leah who was responsible for that, because I don't know if you remember the creative industry strategy at the time. Again, that was new for North London. And I ran workshops in the neighborhoods in all the three boroughs, Enfield and
something, but bring them into the mainstream. And
exactly.
I remember that. Wow.
Again, and of course, if you remember, in those days we had the sector clubs. So Business Link ran the sector clubs, and there was again institutional skeptibility around the creative industries and the and their actual economic contribution.
True. Lots of jokes about how that's oh my word, that's so correct.
And look at that, look at the creative industries now in terms of the importance and the skills and everything around the world. So great. So just before we close, Akin, it's been really great to speak with you. And of course, we'll be speaking again. This is just the initial, bringing back together after 25 years. And I must mention Martin and Aisha, that was part of the Synergy team as well. Martin was great. Martin Akin, I should say, his full name. He sadly passed away quite early. But what was great about Martin, he was the one who really got in my mind the importance of policy, what the policy is. So I was always about implementation. But what I'd learned with him was the policy. And of course, he's one of those people, he can write policy. He can be sitting there and he just starts typing and he sets out what the policy should be. Because they always used to call him in at the tech, Martin, what's the policy on whatever it was? ERDF, ESF funding. You remember how complex and he just had it in his head, and he was just, it's brilliant that way. So Aisha being of Turkish background meant that we were going into and getting the best talent from all the different communities as well. That was another thing, is making best use of the talent from all communities, because it exists.
It really did, and it really makes a difference, by the way.
Absolutely. And again, we use the creative industries to bring the young people together, because we said, like, we create these events and we had representations for all the different communities as well.
By the way, I used to love those events, and you were very good at putting them together, because they were all so different. I mean, the young people, the business folks, the new exporters. It was just really great to go along and speak at those things, and then take it all back to the tech office.
That's right. So tell us about your current role then, Akin.
These days I'm for the last 10 years I've been in the United Arab Emirates. I am in Ajman University. I'm the Dean of the College of Business Administration at the university. I've been for the last 3 years, I think.
We always knew you would go far. But of course, you needed to venture out into the world,
I'm so glad. I remember I went to Middlesex straight out of doctoral studies at the time, and I knew David Smallbone a little bit by reputation. I'd read, some of his work. I think it's cited in here and there, but didn't know him. And so I'd asked people up in Scotland about him, and I went there, and I'm so glad that I did. But when I got to Middlesex, because I think he had started what is still there today, by the way, the Center for Enterprise and Economic Development Research. See that he'd started it maybe 5 or 6 years, something like that, before, and had been doing different kinds of small, medium enterprise research. And when I got there, he challenged me to sort of, in a sense, find my path, find a voice, and then to illustrate what he was talking about, he had talked about minority-owned businesses. So he uses it as an example, and then he carried on talking about whatever it was.
Yeah.
But I latched onto it. I latched onto that and read what's at the time, I think it's Trevor Ward and Mondoram, and this is definitely it. And went and did all of those other things. I'm so glad that we did, because it started off with some small studies, but it really became something of a calling, in the years that followed. So and now here we are.
It's been good for all of us, really. That's what we're really saying. So thank you very much. It's been really great talking to you, and no doubt we will meet again very soon.
I look forward to that. It's been such a pleasure. Yes, I've said a few things, but I've learned so much just from these conversations. Your memory is amazing. You brought up names and places and events that you made them fresh again in my mind. So thank you very much. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you.